Welcome to LiveDaf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's Daf. Menachos Kuf Beis. We are actually partway down the Amid, so we're at line 14 from the top, Meseve. So this is back to our discussion here regarding potential edibility, meaning the starting point is Reb Shimon, based on a pasuk Mikol ha'echel asher ya'achel, which discusses the halacha that food can become tummy. That's only if it's edible, if it could be at least fed to a guy, if you can have hana from feeding it to a guy, so it's mutar b'hana, then that food is considered food with respect to being susceptible to tumah. But otherwise, if it's asur b'hana, totally useless, and it's not regarded as, doesn't have food status with respect to being mekabel tumah. That's Reb Shimon's shita. So it either has to have that ability, or it needs to have had a sha'asa kosher, a moment in time, a moment in its existence where it was in fact regarded as foods. Even though it lost that ability now, it's now asur b'hana, but since it already acquired that status, it retains it. So for instance, an example would be a korban that experienced a psul. It failed, it was a puzzle because it stayed overnight before it was, And the question is, for sure, if there was a zrika done, which means to say that the blood was already applied to the mizbeach, in which case the flesh of the korban is now permitted for consumption, certainly at that point it acquires food status and doesn't lose it. Although it becomes puzzle later, it stayed overnight, etc. But let's say the zrika never actually occurred. There was enough time to do zrika. He had the ability to do so. He should have done so. But it wasn't done. So according to the initial thinking in the Gemara, even potential counts. If the blood was zrika enabled, it was sort of already on that track. It was slated for zrika. It was zrika ready. We treat it as though it happened, so potential is as though it happened, and now the korban is already considered sort of edible. It has that ach oichel status, which makes it roy l'kabel tumah, susceptible to tumah. Whereas according to Rav Ashi, we disagree. No, he says potential doesn't count in this case. Sure, if zrika was actually carried out, in which case the basar became kosher and permitted for consumption, I agree, it's oichel, but if it just was there on potential, that doesn't count. Here comes a kasha on that. Potential doesn't count. We have a Mishnah regarding me'ilah. So me'ilah is where a fellow would divert korban material for personal use. It's a severe violation of me'ilah, provided the korban is still considered kaddish Hashem, committed only for Hashem. But let's say the zrika already took place and taken place, and the korban is now permitted for kohanim's consumption. It loses its unique kaddish Hashem label. It is now ready for the kohanim to consume. It no longer has me'ilah applicable to it. Now, at what point does that status change? Is potential sufficient? So if it's zrika ready, zrika is what permits it for the kohanim's consumption. If it's slated for zrika, if it's oimed lizarak, is that enough to give it that new status where it loses me'ilah? The Mishnah seems to say yes. Meisvei comes a kasha on Rav Ashi, who says potential doesn't count. Klal Amar Rabbi Yehoshua. Yehoshua set up a klal, a rule as follows: Kol shahoysa lo shasa hetel kohanim, any korban which had been permitted for kohanim consumption, so it's that far advanced in the akrava process, it's now mutar for the kohanim, then it loses its me'ilah status, it's no longer kaddish Hashem, ein me'alim ba. Because shaloi ha'isa lo shasa hetel kohanim, but if it did not ever get permissibility for kohanim, then it still retains its kaddish Hashem status, and there is me'ilah for one who diverts it. Examples are as follows: Ve'zeu sha'as heter kohanim. What's considered sha'as heter? Shalana, shenitmes, v'shiyatza. If it was left overnight, it became tamei, the korban material left the premises, it became puzzle. So although it's now failed, it's now deficient, but since it was mutter to the Kohanim, at a certain point, it loses me'ilah. Let me have some examples of non-permissibility where it's not mutter to the Kohanim and it still has me'ilah. Cases where it never got off the ground. It never even started the akrava process. Something happened, some failure happened at the get-go. Shenishchata chutz lezmano. In the shechita itself, there was a deficiency. It was done with a machshava of pigul, v'chuslim kaimot, eaten in the wrong place, the wrong time. Shekiblu psulim, zakras dama, or unqualified individuals did the kabbalah of the dam, or did the zrika. So this was failed from the start. In which case, it still has me'ilah. Okay, let's go back to the first list of cases where it is free of me'ilah because it already gained permissibility to the Kohanim. Katani mi'areish. Let's go back to the first list. Shalana. We assume shalana means it stayed overnight, the basar and the blood, which means they say there was no zrika actually done. You could have done zrika, there was potential, but in actuality it wasn't carried out. Mishnitmas was got tama, you left the area. My love, let's assume lana mamish, that it actually was stayed overnight, which means to say that the basar and the dam were never processed. There was no zrika. So here's a classic example of potential. The boy, if he wishes, if he wanted to, he could have done zrika, have a zurk. Who? Uktani, what does the Mishnah say? That's enough to relieve it of me'ilah. Because it's kohanim ready. It's zrika enabled. Uktani de ein ma'alim bo. So you see from here the potential count. That's a kasha Rav Ashi who says it doesn't. Says Wallahi, no. Actually, let me set the record straight. Ru'uya lotzis, u'uya litami. And Rashi takes out the next two words, u'uya lolim. What happened was that actually there was a zrika. The blood was applied to the mizbeach, so that was accomplished. So at that point it was mutter for the kohanim. The green light was on. And the only thing that could have gone wrong is ru'uya lotzis. It was now liable for becoming pasal by leaving the area or becoming tamei. That's the only problem the only mishap that could have developed was yaitse or tamei, because zrika had already been accomplished. That's not an issue. So in this case, of course, it no longer has me'ilah, because in actuality it was mutar to kohanim. Avolina mamish ma'yachanami d'ma'alim. So what are you saying, that if there was actual lien on the blood, which means to say the blood was never really processed, so it never got to that point of permissibility for kohanim, you're going to say it still retains me'ilah status, really? But if you take a close look and you analyze the wording of the Mishnah, it doesn't indicate as such. So why does the Mishnah use the words, the rule, kol shahaya lo yishaseta l'kohanim, which almost sounds like it had a moment in time where it was suitable, it was potentially suitable to be mutar for kohanim if he would do the zrika. And this is contrasted to v'chol shaloi haisa lo yishaseta l'kohanim, as opposed to where it didn't even have that potential to become mutar, which almost sounds like, which does sound like potential counts. It shouldn't have used that language if you actually have to do it to make it work. Kol sheyesh lo yishaseta l'kohanim. Instead, the Mishnah should have said, if it received the heter because there was an zrika actually done, then there's no me'ilah. As opposed to b'chol she'ein lo shasat l'kohanim me'alba. If it has no heter, then you have me'ilah. That's the way the Mishnah should have worded it. But rather than wording it this way, which sounds like actuality is what's needed, it uses words which indicate potential. The potential is enough to grant it me'ilah free status. Elamar Rav Ashi said, Rashi, you're right. Granted, but this is unique to me'ilah. By me'ilah we say potential's enough, but not when it comes to a question of giving it food status and making it open to be mekabel tumah. Me'ilah, the halacha of me'ilah atuma and the halacha of tumah, karamis, you're asking one on the other, you're comparing? No connection. Different worlds, different systems. In terms of the me'ilah system, mushim kedusha, v'lav kedusha here, there's a question of whether it's kaddish or not. Is it still kaddish Hashem or not? And in this case, once it turned on its blinkers and it shifted lanes. It's about to have Zrika. It's Zrika enabled. It's ready for that act of Zrika which permits it to the Kayanim. It loses Mila. Labasa the Pakal Kedusha, and once it loses that original Kedusha, it's now on a new track. So even if something goes wrong, Rachvala, how does the Kedusha come back and Rachva means like it rides back on it. How does it get back on it? It lost it. Once something was Oymed Lizrak, was about to be Nizrak, and Mutav el Kayhanim, it's on a new track. But when it comes to giving it a food status, you need actual edibility. When it comes to Tumma, the question is it food or not? For that you have to actually experience that food status. It has to be mutter. You have to have Zrika. Without Zrika, in actuality, you can't say potential. We'll give it the Shem Eichel. The Bach actually deletes part of the next couple of lines based on Rashi. He says, read it like this. When it comes to Tumah, the criterion is it edible, is it food or not? Mishum Eichla v'la v'eichla. V'la mishum Eichla hi. Kol eicha delay ma'ash v'lei Eichla. If it's not actually food, if there's no Zrika actually done, ain't it matame to myself? It's not matame. Potential's not. So Rashi stands his ground, keeps his position, but he says Meila is different. Meis we have a kasha. From another source, where we see potential's enough. Maybe Asham Tali. A fellow wasn't sure, he was uncertain whether he ate, chaylev, he has to bring a special carbon, which is called the Asham Tali, to address this uncertainty until he figures out what happened. But then it was discovered that he didn't do it. What do you do with the animal? If it's before Shchita, that's when he discovered the facts and his innocence, send it back to the farm. It was a mistake. Go send it back and let it, join the farm, pasture with the flock. Because since it was a non-event, so it's just chulin. It's not considered like a carbon. That's what Shita Vermeer. No. The fact is, he committed himself to this carbon just in case, so it's a full commitment, irrespective of what he discovers later. Yirach Yistov, you treat it like any other carbon that became puzzle, so you can't actually proceed and be makravit, but you can't just send it back to the farm. You have to send it out, until it gets blemished, and then you switch it out, you redeem it, you transfer the money, and purchase a donated oila, right? You sell it, you have the money directed to Nadava, an oila and Nadav. Rav Lezer Omer, guess what? Just keep on going. You karev, you krav, or proceed with processing of the carbon. You know why? If he's not guilty of this, he's guilty of something else. If it's not coming to address this particular sin which never happened, don't worry. Baal Chet Acha is going to address a different. Certainly he did something else. We could assume that there's another. Now this is before Shchita, Mishin Nishchat. Let's say Shchita had already been done, and then he discovered that he was innocent. So again, according to Rameir, dispose of the carbon with respectfully, like a carbon that's apostle, spill the blood, burn the basar. Nizruk hadam. Let's say Zrika had already happened. That's stage 3. Done is done. I mean the blood is the kapara. The carbon is completely processed. Enjoy it. A basar yachal should have the basar for supper, no problem. Rashi explains, look, the objective was to mechaper a suffix, and that's what it did. So although he discovered later, it doesn't matter. Rabbi Yossi basically adds another point. Afilu adam b'kais, even if the blood is not yet on the mizbeach, it's just in the container, ready for zrika, that's close enough. Yizarek continue with the zrika, Abasi Achlan consume the basar. You know why? From a Rava. Why? Rabbi Yossi b'shitas, Rabbi Shimon is going like Rabbi Shimon. The Amar says, Kala Aymed Lizrak is Dami. That when the blood, the dam, is available for Zrika, it's slated for Zrika, it's Zrika ready, Zrika enabled, we treat it as though it happened. It's already mid-process, already started the process of Zrika, in which case, even though the Zrika didn't actually happen, but it's far enough advanced into the Zrika process, on the Zrika track, we treat it as though it happened, and as though the carbon had been fully processed and he treated accordingly. So what do we see from here? We see that potential counts. That's a kasha on what we said before, that potential is not reckoned with. Even potential zrika is good enough for us regarding this carbon. Says the Gemara, Midi Hutama? Do you think this is the reason, the basis for Rabbi Yosef's Shita? The potential is as though Amri Marava and Etzishol, they explain Mishmei Rabbi Yosef Rechanina in the name of Rabbi Yosef Rechanina, a different shot, a different explanation. It's not that, when it's on its way, it's considered as though it happened. In which case, the carbon is like it's mutter and it's considered edible and has a shasa kosher, and no. I'll tell you Rabbi Yosef's reason. Why in this case, and only in this case, do we proceed? The Kasava, he holds klei shoros mekachnas absulan l'chatchil likariv. Once the blood was retained in klisharis, if you recall, we had a whole discussion in Mesechas Vachim. Even deficient carbon material, once it reaches the mizbeach itself, it gets sort of attached, it gets absorbed, it gets incorporated into the mizbeach, and it doesn't leave. You don't remove it. Klei sharis has a similar power. Even if something is puzzle, like this type of case where he discovered that he was innocent, once it's in a klei sharis, the klei sharis acts like an extension of the mizbeach. L'chatchil l'kar, you can proceed chatchila and put it on the mizbeach. So that's why he says, once the dam reaches the kli, you just keep on going. So that's a particular, specific a chiddush in that type of case. But to say that in general, regarding our general question whether the carbon is deemed to be edible at this point, no, it's not yet edible, because Rika hasn't yet been carried out. Amalei Rav Ashi Rav Kahana. I have a question. The way we had initially thought that according to Rav Shimon, right, we say that potential is like actuality regarding, giving it food status. Med'am Rav Shimon, kol oimed lizrei kazaruk dam. If something is about to have zrika, it's considered as though it happened. So likewise, kol oimed lisrei v'nam kazaruk dami. When something is about to be burnt, we treat it as though it happened. It should have that status. I have a question. Noisar, upara. So you have the basar of a carbon, and it was now left over beyond its time limitation. You say, listen, it was mutar b'achila at one point, so it's still mekabel tumah. It's considered food. Paraduma. We discussed this yesterday. Paraduma. Shechted sitting on the firewood, they're about to be burned. No, it's still considered food because you could switch it out. You could switch it for a different para. It's potentially edible. Fine. Noisur para amai. Why? Why are they metam to masach? Why are they considered like food and they become tummy as such? They're meant to be burnt. And potential counts as though it happened after ba'amu. Then let's treat them just like they're ashes. We view them as ashes because they're meant to be ashes. Amali, he says you're right. So what? Even if it's ashes, and it's an edible material, but when it's carbon material, even if it's an edible, amalei chibas is a term called chibas hakoid, dearness. The fact that it's prominent, the fact that it's carbon material, chibas hakoid machsharta, elevates them to food status and the makabel tumah. So typically it has to be edible to makabel tumah, but carbon material has that ability despite being inedible. Amalei Ravina Ravashi. I have one more question here. Fine. Chibas HaKodesh elevates it, gives it food abilities, and it becomes tummy. It's true. Granted, the Mahani Lu Chibas HaKodesh, this Chibas HaKodesh factor enables it, allows it, the gufi to become pasul in itself. But to become a carrier, to allow it to transfer that tumah to the next item that it touches, that's it's going a little bit far there. The kriya tumah, they actually call it tameh. Nami also lemimne beirishim mishenis, that it can carry on and pass on the tumah to others. So we should apply the general system of rishon l'tumah that get transferred to the next item, which is the shein l'tumah. That's going a little far. And that's really a whole question that was really unresolved by Rish Lakish Tifshait. If so, you can resolve Rish Lakish's question, who asked exactly this. The way Rish Lakish had a question regarding this halacha tzrid. Tzrid is dry material, dry flour, which never was came into contact with liquids, which typically is a prerequisite for becoming tamei. But it's for a mincha. Tzrid shel menachos. So we say, although it doesn't really conform to the standard system of tumah, but since it's carbon material, it's elevated and it's now susceptible to tumah. How far do we go? So if I touch a tumah, I know it itself becomes disqualified. But is it a carrier? Can it actually become tumah to the extent that it can pass on the tumah? Moindin by rishon v'sheni? Should we count, the rishon l'tumah and then passing it on to the next item, which is shein l'tumah? Or yeinin by rishon? Or perhaps we don't do that. It gets personally disqualified, but it can't carry it on. And here we see that it does. When we say that the inedible becomes tamei and to the point that it can carry on and transfer, it's only with the Rabbanan. He's asking Menachos. It's based on a pasuk, right? That habasar, that even something which is inedible. The question is Menachos, how far does it go? So with the Rabbanan, yes, but the question was regarding Menachos, and that was really not resolved yet. Okay, so in a nutshell, going to Reb Shimon, for something to be considered food with respect to being makabel tumah, it has to be something which is mutar b'hana, or there was a point in time in its existence at a shasa kosher who had that ability. So the question is, what are potential? There was dam here that could have been done properly. It wasn't. It could have. Is that enough to give it food status, to make the bus or the carbon, to be considered eichel, permissible food? So according to some opinions, yes. According to Rav Ashi, no. But even he agrees when it comes to me'ilah, that if it had the moment that it could have become mutar l'kayhan, it's already considered on that track where it loses its kedusha, on the higher level of kedusha, which comes along with me'ilah, so it loses the me'ilah. And likewise, we spoke about the asham tali. Even if the idam is in a kli, you can proceed because it's already sort of on its en route. So regarding those cases, we agree that it's considered far enough advanced in the process. We had another question regarding potential ashes. It certainly becomes possible, but to what extent remains to be clarified. Says the Mishnah, Haimer, a fellow declares a pledge as follows: Harei alai b'machmas, I'm going to bring a mincha, which is going to be processed in a shallow frying pan, a certain format, certain type. And he goes ahead and he brings a mincha, but the wrong way. Vevi marcheshes, he brings a deep fried mincha. Or vice versa, marcheshes, he promised a marcheshes, vevi machmas. Mashehevi. Okay, whatever he offered works. But he has to redo and bring his real pledge. Videi chavasa lo yatsi, he hasn't really fulfilled his obligation, but the mincha is kosher. However, zulavi b'machmas, he points to specific material. This flour is going to be offered in a machmas, and he switches that. That disqualifies it, because the material itself had been committed to this particular format, and it wasn't. Zulavi b'machmas, maybe he brought it marcheshes, or the opposite, marcheshes v'hevi b'machmas harizu psula. Another example of a deviation is in quantity. Ha'omer harei alai shnei esroines. I'm going to be generous. I'm going to bring 2 esroines, 2 pounds, right? But I'm going to bring it together in one kli, this real nice jumbo mincha. Lavi b'kli echad. It turns out that he split them into 2. Maybe b'shnei kelim. Or the opposite, he promised b'shnei kelim. Maybe he actually brought it in one kli b'kli echad. Again, it works, but he has to redo it to fulfill his personal obligation. Mashehevi hevi. V'dei chavasa, that he hasn't fulfilled the yatsa. But if he points to this particular material and he designates it to be brought in this way, elu b'kli echad, these 2 esroines are going to be brought together in one jumbo format. Maybe, but then he splits them, b'shnei kelim, or the opposite, he promised b'shnei kelim, maybe and he brought them b'kli echad, then it disqualifies the whole thing, because these materials have been committed to a particular format, which they didn't actually... Okay, let's elaborate further on this last case. Harei alai shnei esroines, lavi b'kli echad. I'm promising to bring 2 esroines in one kli. And he shows up with 2 kelim, split them into 2, maybe b'shnei kelim. Amrlos, the people around him say, hey, hold it, mister. Don't you remember that you promised to bring them together as one big jumbo? B'kli echad nadartu, you promised one kli. Hikriva mishnei kelim psulim. So now, it's very possible that this is a new commitment, unrelated to his original pledge. Right? But then he would have said something to his crowd. He would have said, well, this is something else, don't worry. He didn't do that. He just ignored them. He proceeded and brought them as two. So clearly he was attempting to, carry out his commitment, to actualize his pledge, but in the wrong way, so then it's psulim. But of course, if he switches it back with kli echad into one kli, so clearly it was sort of a mistake, right? With a toos. The fact that it wasn't two kelim, he now corrected himself, so it's ksher and it's okay because this is exactly as he promised. Another example of this back and forth, Harei alai shnei yisroinos, Lavi shnei kelim, he promised two yisroinos split into two, maybe he brought them as one, unbelievable, so the people around him said, they hold it. Don't you remember? Shnei kelim nodad, you promised two. So he quickly divides them, great. So it's restored the way it's meant to be, ksher. But if he insists on keeping them together as one without comment, so obviously he's just ignoring them. He's sort of deviating from his pledge. He's trying to carry out his pledge in the wrong way. Naslan kli echad. So then it's like two separate minchas that got mixed up. Because really he's bringing two menachos. He's carrying out his pledge of two menachos, but he's mixing them together. So we treat them kishtei menachos, like two menachos in the summer that got mixed together. What's the halacha? We learned it a while ago. If they're totally mixed with each other, there's a problem. But if there's enough separate material to allow a separate kmitza from each pile, then you can get away with that. So initially, the Mishnah spoke about a case where he promised to bring one type and he brought something else. So he promised to bring them together, brought them separate, or vice versa. Technically, the mincha works, but he has to redo his, b'makayim his commitment in the way he promised. Why does the Mishnah have to highlight two different examples to bring out the same point? We only discussed the first case where he changed the actual format. Yeah, because he promised one type, he brought a different type. Yeah, that doesn't work. But in the second series of cases, the he promised and he actually brought a machvas. Or he promised and he actually brought a machesh. It's just a question of, together or split into two. Perhaps I would posit that it's enough, sufficient even as a fulfillment of his neder, and that's why the Mishnah has to tell you otherwise. On the other hand, if the Mishnah only spoke about the second case, because he's formatting them in the wrong way, I split them into two, that's disqualifying. Aval Hassan like Palagu in the first series of cases, we didn't split into two. Right? The quantity is the same, just a slightly different variation in terms of format. Perhaps it's not so terrible, and it's considered a kiyum of his neder tzricha. Comes the Mishnah says in both cases, deviation disqualifies, meaning since he deviated, he has to redo in order to fulfill his neder. Tanu Rabbanan. Here comes the dissenting view. Reb Shimon says that format is not so important. So Tanakama says, if he switched formats, technically the mincha works, but he has to bring another one. Mincha is a mincha. It's all in the family. So even if he committed to a certain type, and he brought a different type, ultimately what determines the type is what it's actually going to be brought as. So just because he promised one type doesn't matter. He's committed to a mincha in general. What type? The one that will actually bring. Now the Mishnah continues, Zulahavi machvas. If he designated this particular material as machvas, and then he switches, the material itself becomes possible, tanila. But the Mishnah, the Brisa, which says lekitchim kli sharis, that if you put it in the wrong kli, it does not affect the material. It doesn't become, it doesn't get elevated to a higher status of kedushas haguf, inherent kedusha, which means to say that you can just take it out and put it in the other kli. It wasn't committed to this process. So why is it possible? When the Brisa says that the kli did not have any effect on the material, it means to say in a positive sense, because this material was meant to be in a different type of kli. But kitchum li pasal does make it kaddish with respect to becoming pasal to his detriment. It has a negative effect on it. So you can no longer take it out and put it back in a different kli. Rabbi continues Rabbi Loishana. When do we say that switching the type of kli is possible? Shekav mishas neder. So we're on Kaf Gimel. But if he determined the format when he expressed his initial pledge, I am going to bring this material as a machbas. But let's say initially he just promised the regular mincha, generic mincha, and then when he found the flour, he said, "Oh, this is going to be for the machbas." That's not going to have that's not going to affect the material. It's not going to commit it to that particular format. And you can switch it. Why? The Torah says, keep your pledge. Carry out your words, kashan or darta, as per when you were noider, when you made that pledge. That affects commitment. As opposed to what he expressed when he actually, designated the material, which was not at the time of the neder. Itmar Nami, we learned likewise. When do we say the material is committed to this particular track? It was committed at the time of the neder, but later on doesn't really have that effect. Based on this pasuk, kashan darta, v'loy kasher frashta. Okay, so we learn in the Mishnah that a person deviates from his commitment. Technically, the mincha is okay, but it doesn't really count as a fulfillment of his neder. According to Rav Shimon, it does. And the second part of the Mishnah, we spoke about material that was designated for a specific format. In that case, if he switches it, the material itself becomes possible. But again, that's only when he designated at the time of the neder. Then, it's committed to this process. But otherwise, he's free to change it. All the best to you and Hatzlach.